The Battle of the Little Bighorn is a pivotal chapter in the history of the American West. A fierce confrontation where warriors fought not only for survival but for the very essence of their culture. Dog, an Oglala Sioux warrior, shares his first-hand account of this legendary battle, a tale of bravery, strategy, and the clash of two worlds. Through his eyes, we get a glimpse of the events leading up to that fateful day in 1876. From the Sioux' tense standoff with General Crook to their final, resolute stand against Custer's forces. His narrative weaves together not just the battle itself, but the deep connection to his people, their lands, and their struggle against overwhelming odds. Before 1876, I was living on a reservation along the Platte. Our band, the Oglala, spent winters on the Tongue River. On March 17, 1876, we fought alongside Crook, 3-star, Yami, against the Cheyennes, but I was only with a small group of Sioux. This was a Cheyenne camp led by Little Wolf. When we faced Crook, our village was located on Sundance Creek, not far from Little Bighorn. There was a bluff nearby, covered with pines. This was likely the area near Lone Tepe. During the skirmish, I lost 7 horses. That evening, we camped on Lodgepole Creek and sent out men who managed to retrieve some of the horses. The Indian at Lone Tepe was a Sandsark, a brother of Turning Bear. He was shot through the bowels during the fight with Crook. We intended to confront Crook again, but we didn't see any crows around, and we feared they might attack our village, so we decided to turn back. The main reason we didn't pursue Crook was that we were too far from our villages, which were not only a long distance away but spread out across a large area. We also worried that the Crows and Shoshones could harm our villages while we were gone. We saw that Crook had a considerable number of Indians with him, and we knew we had defeated him because he turned back. We moved to Little Bighorn 3 days after the encounter with Crook. The Sioux didn't want any more fighting, so when we reached Little Bighorn, we thought the conflict was over. Our wives and children were with us, and we needed to hunt buffalo for them, hoping to be left in peace. It has always been an argument among Sioux whether second or third day after we moved camp to Little Bighorn that Sioux party of 7 Sioux saw Custer's dust. These Indians did not come back in Warren Village but made a circle around the soldiers and went on southeast to the agencies. Fasthorn was the Indian whom Varnum saw from Crow's Nest, and he got back to village only a short time before Reno appeared. Of the 7 scouts who discovered Custer, Black Bear and Dirt Kettle were among them. They saw Custer's dust, and Custer coming so fast doubted whether they could beat him to village, so took a look at soldiers and went on toward agencies. The Oglalas were not present at Little Bighorn on June 25th. They were located further north, near the river, northwest of the Hunkpapa. They did not anticipate a fight in this area because Crook had already moved away. The Brules were not at Little Bighorn in the village on June 25th either. They were positioned near the Oglala. There were a fair number of Brules, with more than 20 lodges reported. Flying Chaser, or Wakuya Kinyon, was the leader of the Brules, though not a prominent chief. The Hunkpapa had the largest presence, followed by the Miniconju. The Hunkpapa and Blackfeet together had around 600 to 700 lodges, while the Santees contributed about 30 to 40 lodges, with their chief, Inkpaluda, present. Only 2 Arapahoes were there. It is estimated there were about 1,800 lodges in total at the village. I did not see any white men among the Sioux. In my camp, there was a Canadian half-breed who spoke fluent English as well as Sioux. As Reno approached, the Hunkpapa advanced ahead, mostly on foot, while I was delayed in getting on my horse. The Hunkpapa reached the timber's edge and held the soldiers back. I was positioned on a hill to the west of Reno's skirmish line, where the Indians were preparing to charge the soldiers in the timber. Not all the Sioux had arrived yet, but Indians from all tribes were gathering, those who had horses and could make it. Just as we launched our charge, the soldiers quickly withdrew from the timber in 2 groups, riding as fast as they could towards the river. Indian scouts were also chased from the timber to the river, with some killed in the process. I noticed Benteen arriving, so we stopped pursuing Reno. Afterward, I returned to the Hunkpapa camp. From there, we saw more soldiers approaching from the large hill to the east. They continued down the river, crossed Medicine Tail Coulee, and ascended a small rise. This rise was the first one above the flatland south of the mouth of Medicine Tail, where Foley was later found. The distance measured from his office to the tank matched exactly with my map, about 600 feet. Here, Custer's troops were scattered along a line parallel to the river, stretching from Foley to Butler. As Custer approached Ford B, it appeared he was heading toward the lower part of our camp. In my view, the 5 men who were killed on the hill by the cut bank opposite the village were likely at the front of the column and encountered Indians moving up the river. The Indians had already left the camp to the west to prepare. There was no significant fighting while Custer was near the river, though a few shots were fired. No large-scale combat occurred. About 15 or 20 Sioux were on the east side of the river, and some soldiers returned fire, but the exchange was limited. I didn't hear Custer fire any volleys. White Cow Bull, one of the few warriors at the ford when Custer attempted to cross, claimed he shot an officer, most likely Custer, while he was in the middle of the river, knocking him from his horse into the water. He confirmed the location of Foley was correct and that he was the one who shot the officer. Before the battle started, we drove Custer up a slope to a ridge, Keogh's position, and across to the other side. The soldiers remained mounted throughout, continuing to move along as a group. There was no fighting by individual companies. The Indians were spread out along Custer Ridge, while Custer himself advanced down the hollow by Keogh. By this point, the Indians had surrounded them. At first, the gray horses were grouped together, but they became mixed with others as they moved up the hill. The fighting began at Finley and continued across the battlefield. At Keogh, Crazy Horse led a charge that broke through, splitting Custer's forces into 2 groups. The horses stampeded toward the river, fleeing from the soldiers. There was no charge from Custer's men on the ridge during the battle. Custer's forces were positioned at the end of the ridge. They did not run out of ammunition. We found some of their ammunition on the dead soldiers. As the men fled from Custer's last stand toward the river, the dismounted soldiers took refuge in the gully, while the mounted ones attempted to escape southward toward Finley. The mounted soldiers from Line H tried to flee when they made their way toward the gully. Foley rode out of the fight from H. This corroborates the accounts of 28 dead soldiers found in the gully. The battle with Custer lasted no more than an hour, at least according to my estimation. We didn't know we were fighting Custer's men and had no idea which soldiers they were. The Cheyennes showed great bravery in this battle, taking a prominent role. The more bloodthirsty among us grew tired of scalping before reaching Custer's group. I never heard of Buster being killed in the villages. He knew a Santee who often accompanied the soldiers. Mitch Booyer, possibly also known as Bloody Knife, was killed, and his body was recognized by the Sioux. After we had killed all of Pecushi's, Custer's, soldiers, we turned our attention to the remaining troops and cornered them on the high bluffs, where we shot at them as they rushed toward the water. If Terry had not arrived with reinforcements, we would have worn them out in a few days. We had plenty of ammunition left after June 26th. We had ways to acquire more, and the ammunition taken from Custer's men was used against the other soldiers. Many of the soldiers had Winchesters, but we were armed with a variety of weapons. The number of Indians killed at Little Bighorn was between 30 and 40. A much larger number were wounded, and some of them later died from their injuries. After the battle, the various tribes moved upriver, heading toward the Bighorn Mountains. They remained united until they reached Slim Buttes, where they split up, with Sitting Bull setting out for Canada. I participated in the Slim Buttes fight. After the camp was broken up, the Oglalas, Sans Arcs, Minneconjous, and Cheyennes stayed near the area, but the Hunkpapas moved on. The tribe that was massacred there were the Minneconjous, who had been out hunting deer. No chief was killed in that incident. The man who was wounded in the bowels and died there was not a chief, but a Sans Arc relative of mine. There were never 2 American horses, to my knowledge. Low Dog was an Oglala. Bigfoot was a Minneconjou. Black Twin did not take part in the fight. He died in 1875. Kicking Bear was not a subchief. Crazy Horse and Big Road were the principal chiefs of the Oglalas. Red Cloud, an Oglala, was born there. He Dog's account of the Battle of the Little Bighorn is more than just a recounting of military conflict. It is a testimony to the strength, unity, and resilience of the Sioux people in the face of adversity. While history often remembers the battle as a victory for the native warriors, He Dog's words remind us of the complex realities that followed. The aftermath of June 25, 1876, saw the Sioux move on, their paths shaped by the battle, the losses, and the shifting tides of history. Yet, in his tale, we hear not just of warriors, but of a people's enduring spirit, their fight for freedom and their place in a changing world.